The land stretched out, lifeless. There were no winds, no shifting of dust, no sounds. It was silence, dense, immovable silence. The kind that doesn't offer peace but presses down on you, as if even the absence of life carried a weight. They stood on the planet's surface, staring out at a horizon that offered nothing. For centuries, it had been nothing but this, a forgotten place, an abandoned world. Now it was chosen by them, by humanity, for reasons few fully understood. The sky, a pale gray, didn't change. It neither brightened nor darkened, offering a sense of eternal dusk. To any observer, it seemed like a place beyond time, where moments didn't begin or end, but blended into a single, continuous stretch of nothing. For the first time in thousands of years, human feet pressed into the soil of this place, breaking the stillness. Dr. Elias Kade stood at the forefront, staring across the landscape. He was an engineer, a man known for his calm efficiency, someone who had spent years breathing life into dead planets. His team, scattered across the barren plain, set up equipment, each motion careful, measured, deliberate. They had trained for this, they knew the risks. Yet, there was an unease that none of them could shake off. This world, unlike the others they had terraformed, was not simply dead, it felt abandoned, almost deliberately erased. Every scan, every probe had found no signs of life, not even the smallest organism. But the ruins scattered across its surface spoke of something different. Whoever had once lived here, they had erased themselves, scrubbed their existence clean from the planet, leaving only whispers behind. No records, no remains, just the bones of structures left to decay. Still nothing, Kade muttered, turning to his colleague, Dr. Amara Holt. She was quieter than him, though her mind was known to be sharper. A biologist by trade, she was here to oversee the planet's potential for sustaining life. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes were fixed on a distant structure, one of the many skeletal remnants of a civilization lost. "It's strange, isn't it?" she said, her voice breaking the quiet. "It's almost as if it was meant to stay this way." Kade didn't answer immediately. He had his own thoughts, but found them difficult to articulate. The mission was clear: terraform the planet, breathe life into it once more. But something about this place resisted that idea. It wasn't just that the land was dead. It felt as though it had died on purpose, as if life had been removed with intent. They had brought the latest technology, the greatest minds. But could they challenge the will of something so deeply woven into the planet's existence? The rest of the team went about their work. Towers designed to adjust the atmosphere were being assembled. Devices that could seed new ecosystems from microscopic organisms were being set in place. Yet each movement, each task, felt like they were disturbing something sacred, like trespassing on hallowed ground. "Why did they choose this world?" Kade finally asked. He wasn't addressing anyone in particular, but Holt answered. "It's empty," she said simply. "It's far from any inhabited systems. No one would care what happens here." That was the truth of it. Earth, overburdened with billions of lives, teetering on the edge of collapse, needed new homes, new planets, new places where humanity could extend its reach. This world was one of many options, chosen not for its potential, but for its emptiness. No one to challenge them, no native species to displace. It was a blank slate, or so they had been told. "Do you ever wonder if we should leave it alone?" Holt's question hung in the air. It was the kind of thought they weren't supposed to entertain. Their mission was to conquer, to transform, to make the dead planet live again. But here, under this unmoving sky, the question felt real, necessary. Kade looked at her, then back at the horizon. "I don't think we were ever meant to leave anything alone. That's not what we do." And wasn't that the truth of it? Humanity, in all its endless hunger, never left anything untouched. Every barren planet, every stretch of emptiness, was just another frontier waiting to be tamed. But what if this world wasn't like the others? What if it was dead for a reason? The day's work continued. The first signs of atmospheric adjustment appeared as thin layers of condensation began to form on the equipment, an early indication that the planet's air was beginning to change. But beneath that surface, beneath the quiet hum of the machinery, something felt wrong. A quiet tension settled over the camp that night. The crew gathered around the main tent, where the central computer system was being monitored. The atmosphere around them felt denser, heavier, though the readings didn't reflect any changes beyond the minor adjustments they'd initiated. As they sat down to eat, the conversations were subdued. Kade could feel the weight of their thoughts hanging in the silence. Each of them carried their own reasons for being here. Some were adventurers at heart, eager to push the boundaries of what was possible. Others had come for redemption, trying to outrun mistakes they'd made on other worlds. But now, sitting on the edge of this dead place, their motivations seemed smaller, less clear. Holt broke the silence again. "What happens if we can't do it? What if this place rejects us?" "There's no rejection," Kade said, though he wasn't entirely sure if he believed it. "We've done this before. We have the technology." "But it feels different," she pressed. "You feel it, don't you?" He did. But he wasn't about to say that. Not here, not in front of the rest of the crew. They had to stay focused. This was just another mission, another step in humanity's long march forward. But the unease wouldn't leave him. There was something about this planet, something that refused to be ignored. That night, Kade lay awake in his tent, staring at the fabric overhead. The silence outside was unlike anything he had ever experienced. No wind, no animals, not even the faint hum of insects or the rustle of leaves. Nothing. It was as if the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting. He thought about what Holt had said earlier, about the planet rejecting them. It was a strange thought, one that didn't make sense. Planets didn't reject life. They either supported it or they didn't. That was the equation, the simple truth of it. But this place, it felt like there was something more. Something beneath the surface, hidden away. Morning came, though it was impossible to tell from the sky. The team went back to work, but the atmosphere had shifted. There was a nervous energy now, an unspoken tension. Even the machinery seemed to resist, as if the planet was pushing back, ever so slightly. Small malfunctions, minor setbacks, things that shouldn't have happened. Kade walked the perimeter, inspecting the equipment, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were intruding on something, that they had crossed a line they weren't meant to. And for the first time in his career, he wondered if maybe they had gone too far. The world beneath their feet was waking up. It wasn't in the machines, or the soil, or the air. It was something else, something ancient and distant, something that had been waiting for them. The day began like the last. Silence hovered over the camp, the sky still locked in a perpetual gray. The cold, barren surface of the planet stretched on, endless and unchanged. But beneath that facade, something had shifted. Something subtle but undeniable. Dr. Elias Kade was the first to notice. His hands moved over the console, adjusting readings and comparing data. At first, it was nothing more than a small anomaly, a slight irregularity in the atmospheric data. He stared at the screen, his eyes narrowing, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It didn't add up. The machines they had deployed to adjust the atmosphere were operating perfectly. Yet the planet was resisting in ways that weren't reflected in the numbers. He ran a diagnostic, then another. Nothing was wrong with the equipment, but the planet was telling a different story. A low hum vibrated through the ground, so faint that no one but Kade seemed to notice. He pressed his hand to the earth, feeling it a barely perceptible pulse. It wasn't mechanical, not the typical vibration of the terraforming machines. It was something deeper, coming from far below the surface. He stood up, brushing the dust from his gloves, and walked toward Holt, who was crouched by one of the atmospheric towers, checking the filters. "You picking up anything strange?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even, though the unease from yesterday still clung to him. Holt didn't look up. "Define strange," she said, tightening a bolt on the tower before straightening to face him. "What's the readout showing?" Kade handed her his tablet. She studied it in silence for a moment, her brow furrowing. "Atmospheric density is fluctuating. That's not supposed to happen, at least not this soon." "Right," he said quietly. "And then there's this." He tapped on the screen, highlighting a cluster of readings from beneath the planet's surface. Holt stared at it, her expression tightening. You think the planet's doing this? I mean, we're just getting started. There shouldn't be any measurable changes yet, not at this level. That's the thing. We've done everything by the book. The atmospheric shifts, the soil, everything's reacting, but not how it should. It's almost like something down there is responding. She raised an eyebrow. Responding. I don't know how else to explain it. They both stood there for a moment, staring out at the barren expanse, the ruins barely visible in the distance. It was the first time Kade had said it out loud, and now that the words had left his mouth, they hung in the air between them, heavy and unsettling. The planet was waking up. They gathered the team later that day. In the dim light of the central tent, the air felt even thicker than before, as if the atmosphere was pressing down on them. Kade laid out the data for the others, the flickering holographic display casting faint blue light over their faces. What are we looking at here, Samuel Ward? The mission's lead geologist asked, leaning forward in his seat, arms crossed over his chest. His tone was skeptical, bordering on dismissive, but Kade could see the concern creeping into his eyes. These anomalies, Kade began, pointing at the display. They're not coming from our equipment. It's something beneath the surface. Something ancient, I think. Ward leaned back, shaking his head. Ancient? That's a hell of a leap, Kade. Kade met his gaze. It's the only explanation that fits. The planet isn't just dead rock. There's something here, something we didn't account for. Ward opened his mouth to speak, but Amara Holt cut him off. He's right, she said. I ran my own scans. There are energy readings below the surface, faint but distinct, and they're growing stronger. The room fell silent. The implications of what they were saying weighed heavily on everyone. The mission had been sold to them as straightforward. A dead world, ripe for reawakening. But now, with each passing moment, it became clearer that this place was anything but simple. After a long pause, Kade continued. Look, I don't know what's causing this, but we need to proceed with caution. We don't know what we're dealing with. Ward finally spoke again, his voice edged with frustration. You're saying we stop? We can't. We're already in motion. Earth needs this, Kade. You know that. Kade clenched his jaw. Of course, he knew it. Everyone here knew it. Earth was on the brink, the population suffocating under its own weight. This mission, this planet, was supposed to be part of the solution. A new beginning. But now, standing on the cusp of it, it felt wrong. Forced. No one's saying we stop, Kade replied slowly. But we can't ignore what's happening. Holt glanced between them, her eyes unreadable. There's something else, she said quietly, almost as if she didn't want to speak the words aloud. These readings, they aren't natural. They're too regular, too structured. The implication hit them all at once. This wasn't just some random planetary quirk. It was technology, buried beneath the surface, dormant for who knows how long. And now, with their meddling, it was coming to life. Kade could feel the tension in the room shift. The weight of what they were dealing with settled over them like a shroud. They had come here to breathe life into a dead world, but now it seemed like the world had its own plans. Later that evening, Kade walked alone across the camp, his thoughts heavy. The strange hum beneath the ground had grown more pronounced throughout the day. He could feel it now, vibrating faintly through the soles of his boots as he walked, as if the planet itself had a heartbeat. The air felt thicker, charged, as if something unseen was moving beneath the surface. He found himself standing at the edge of the camp, staring out at the distant ruins, their jagged shapes barely visible in the gray light. He wondered who had built them, what kind of people had once lived here, and why they had disappeared. He thought about Earth, about the cities choked with pollution and overpopulation, about the forests and rivers that had once teemed with life, now replaced by barren wastelands. And here they were again, standing on the precipice of a new beginning, repeating the same mistakes. They had come to this world with the intention of giving it life, but now it seemed like life was already here, waiting for them. That night, the dreams came. Kade lay in his tent, the hum from the planet vibrating through the ground beneath him. echoing in his bones. He dreamt of vast machines buried deep beneath the surface, their gears grinding to life after millennia of stillness. He saw flashes of light, strange symbols that he couldn't understand, and then darkness. A darkness that wasn't just the absence of light, but something deeper, something alive. He woke with a start, sweat beading on his forehead. The air in the tent felt stifling, too thick to breathe. He stumbled outside, gasping for air, but the sensation didn't leave him. The planet was awake now. He could feel it, pulsing beneath his feet, growing stronger with each passing moment. As the first light of morning began to filter through the gray sky, Kade stood at the edge of the camp, watching the horizon. The ruins, once still and lifeless, seemed to shimmer faintly in the distance, as if something was stirring within them. And then, from deep beneath the surface, a sound emerged. A low, rumbling tone, unlike anything he had ever heard. It was deep, resonant, vibrating through the ground and into his bones. The planet was speaking, and whatever it had to say, Kade knew it wasn't meant for human ears. The air carried a stillness that hadn't been present before. Every step the team took toward the ruins felt heavier, as if the ground itself resisted their presence. Beneath their boots, the dust swirled in soft clouds, covering the old stones that had been exposed after centuries of silence. Elias Kade, walking slightly ahead, crouched down, running his gloved fingers over the uneven surface of a fractured stone tablet half buried in the dirt. It wasn't just any stone, it was intricately carved, covered in symbols that spiraled outward from its center, layered with a deliberate complexity. He traced the grooves, trying to comprehend the meaning behind them, but the language was foreign ancient in a way that made Earth's oldest relics seem modern. The team had unearthed their first tangible evidence of a civilization that had once called this planet home. "I've never seen anything like this," Holt murmured behind him, her voice tinged with something between awe and unease. Ward stepped closer, his brow furrowed. "It's older than we thought. Whatever happened here, it wasn't a natural extinction." Kade stood, his gaze locked on the towering ruins ahead. The ruins felt different today, more than a curiosity or an artifact of a bygone era. They felt alive in a way he couldn't quite explain. Each piece they uncovered hinted at something far more profound, a history lost to time yet eerily familiar. The thought gnawed at him. Further ahead, the team uncovered more relics, fragments of walls, broken pottery, scattered tools, and an obelisk half buried in the ground. The relics themselves told a fragmented story, one that resonated with unsettling parallels to Earth's history, a civilization that had reached the pinnacle of its power only to face an unspeakable downfall. Holt stood by the obelisk, her fingers brushing the surface of the carvings etched into its stone. "Look at this," she said softly, her voice tight. "This wasn't an accident. This was something they saw coming." She turned to face Kade, her eyes dark with the weight of her own thoughts. "We came here to fix our mistakes, but maybe this planet is warning us." Her words hung in the air, thick with implication. The others were silent, their gazes shifting between the ruins and each other, the tension between them palpable. It was impossible to ignore the message these relics seemed to carry. Humanity wasn't the first to face the precipice of self-destruction. This world had walked that path before, and now, so were they. Kade didn't respond immediately. His mind wrestled with the weight of Holt's observation. The echoes of Earth's own collapse reverberated through every discovery they made. And now, standing amidst the remnants of a dead world, the line between past and future felt too thin. "I don't believe in fate," Ward said suddenly, breaking the silence. "We're not them. Whatever mistakes this civilization made, they're not ours." "Are they not?" Amara Holt shot back. "We polluted Earth, drained its resources, pushed its ecosystems to the brink. We're still paying for those mistakes. And now we're here, trying to force life onto a dead planet, playing gods again." Ward's expression hardened. "This mission isn't about playing God. It's about survival. Earth's dying, Holt. You know that. We can't afford to think like that anymore." "And what if survival comes at the cost of repeating the same destruction?" she countered. This planet, whatever it was, it died because they couldn't change. And now we're standing here, trying to breathe life back into it without understanding what killed it in the first place." Ward said nothing, but the tension in the air crackled like static between them. Kade, still running his fingers over the symbols on the stone tablet, listened to the exchange in silence. Their words were familiar, reminiscent of the debates that had raged back on Earth. The scientists, the politicians, the visionaries. Everyone had ideas about what needed to be done, but no one could agree on what should be done. The same conflict echoed here, amplified by the mystery surrounding the ruins and the shadows of their own history. Later that evening, Kade found himself sitting at the edge of the camp, staring out at the ruins. The wind had picked up, stirring the dust into thin spirals that twisted and disappeared as quickly as they formed. His mind wandered back to Earth, his childhood in the crowded, smog-choked cities, the constant news reports of environmental collapse, the riots, the desperation. They had tried to fix it, of course. Too late, but they had tried. And yet, no matter how hard humanity fought for survival, the damage always seemed too vast, too irreversible. The relics they had uncovered today weighed on him more than he expected. It wasn't just the evidence of a lost civilization, it was what it represented. The obelisk, the shattered walls, the scattered tools all painted a picture of a society that had once been vibrant, teeming with life and intelligence. And then, silence. How long had it taken for them to realize their world was dying? Did they scramble for a solution in their final days, like Earth had? Did they ever find redemption? Or were they simply erased, leaving nothing but fragments of their existence buried beneath the surface? Amara approached quietly, her boots crunching on the loose gravel. She sat beside him without a word, her gaze fixed on the ruins in the distance. "You're thinking about Earth," she said finally. Kade nodded. "Hard not to." She sighed, pulling her knees to her chest. "Sometimes, I wonder if we even deserve this chance, after everything we've done." Kade glanced at her, catching the way her features softened in the dim light. She rarely spoke about her past, but he knew there was more to her than just her dedication to the mission. The scars of Earth's collapse were etched into her in ways he didn't fully understand. She had seen more than most, had lived through the wars that erupted as the planet struggled to hold on to its last breath. There was a time when she'd fought for something more, for the idea that Earth could be saved. But those days were long gone. "We can't undo what's been done," Kade said quietly, "but maybe we can learn from it." "And maybe we can't," she replied. "Maybe we're doomed to repeat it." The silence that followed was thick with shared regret, the weight of their collective history pressing down on them. Kade felt it, too, the creeping doubt that perhaps they were simply delaying the inevitable, that no matter what they did, humanity's fate had already been written in the stars, just as it had been for the people who once called this planet home. Yet, there was something more in the relics they had found. A sense that this lost civilization had struggled against the same forces of destruction, had fought for survival just as Earth was now. And perhaps, in that fight, there was still hope. Not just for redemption, but for something deeper, an understanding of their place in the universe. As night settled in, the team gathered in the central tent, the glow of the lamps casting long shadows over the weathered faces of those who had spent the day in the ruins. Ward, Holt, and the others spoke in hushed tones, reviewing the data, trying to piece together the story behind the artifacts. But Kade's thoughts were elsewhere, drawn back to the planet itself and the mysteries it continued to guard. There were answers here, buried in the dust and the stone. But for every answer they uncovered, new questions arose, questions that didn't have easy solutions. And the more they dug, the more he began to wonder, had they truly come here to rebuild? Or had they come here to confront the ghost of their own failures? One thing was certain: the planet wasn't finished with them. Not yet. It still had secrets to reveal, truths that went far beyond the relics and the ruins. And as they ventured deeper into its forgotten past, they would have to decide what those truths meant for humanity's future. In the distance, the wind howled softly, carrying with it the echoes of a lost world. The activation of the terraforming project was both meticulously planned and deeply anticipated. As the machines roared to life, They felt like the pulse of a new heartbeat in the veins of a world long since left for dead. Standing in the control center, Elias Kade watched the data streams on the console flicker and shift, the readouts confirming that the sequence had been initiated. Outside, the barren expanse began to hum with latent energy, the hum of machines digging deep into the soil and atmosphere. Automated drones, sleek and almost serpentine in design, slithered across the cracked terrain, injecting the land with life-giving compounds. Above, the clouds heavy and gray began to thin, responding to the atmospheric regulators, opening to reveal patches of deep blue sky. But beneath that awe, a weight hung in the air, unspoken yet palpable among the team. Kade glanced at Amara, who stood at the edge of the observation platform. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, but her posture was rigid, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. She didn't need to say anything. The tension was etched into the lines of her face. They had done it. The barren soil was no longer barren. In patches, green began to emerge, tiny seedlings pushing through the cracked surface, nourished by the carefully engineered nutrients the machines provided. What had been dead now stirred with the first signs of life. But Kade couldn't ignore the unease creeping through him. The hum of the machines sounded almost too alive, as if the planet itself was beginning to awaken in response. He didn't know if it was the relics, the ruins, or the whispers of a lost civilization, but something about the process felt wrong. They were not just bringing life to the planet, they were disturbing something they didn't understand. From the far side of the platform, Ward stepped forward, his eyes wide with admiration. "Look at it. This is what we came here for, to breathe life back into a dead world." His voice was filled with pride, almost reverence, as if the act of creation justified everything. "We've done it," he continued, more to himself than to anyone in particular. "We've brought it back." The others on the platform murmured in agreement, their eyes tracing the verdant patches stretching further and further across the horizon. The drones continued their work, spreading the engineered vegetation at a rapid pace, carefully calculated to ensure the planet's ecosystems would grow sustainably over time. But Kade didn't share their enthusiasm. He saw the green, yes, but what lay beneath it? The memories of Earth's destruction haunted him, the way nature had pushed back against humanity's attempts to control it. A cold shiver ran down his spine, a thought taking shape in his mind. What if this planet wasn't like Earth? What if it didn't need to fight back in the same way? What if it had already lost? "I'm not sure we should be celebrating just yet," Kade muttered, his voice barely audible over the hum of machinery. Ward turned toward him, frowning. "What are you talking about? This is exactly what we came here to do." Kade's eyes remained fixed on the spreading greenery. "I know. But look at it. Everything's happening so fast. We're forcing life into this place, but we haven't even begun to understand what was here before." Ward shook his head, dismissing Kade's concern with a wave of his hand. "That's just history, Kade. Whatever happened here doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that we're bringing this planet back to life." "Is it really life, though?" Holt spoke up, stepping away from the platform railing. Her voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it, a tension simmering beneath the surface. "What we're doing here, it's not the same as letting a world grow naturally. We're imposing our will on it." Ward scoffed. "It's not about nature, it's about survival. Earth's done, and we need a new home. This is it." Holt's gaze flickered between Ward and Kade, her lips pressing into a thin line. "And what if this world doesn't want us here?" A silence fell over the group. It wasn't just about the logistics of terraforming. It was about something more profound. They were trespassing in a place that had its own history, its own secrets buried deep beneath the surface. Kade could feel the weight of that history pressing down on him, just as it had the day they discovered the relics. The symbols carved into the stones, the obelisk, the fragments of tools, they all told a story. A story of a civilization that had once thrived here, only to vanish without a trace. Now they were stepping into that story, rewriting it without understanding what had come before. Amara turned toward Kade, her eyes narrowing. "You're feeling it too, aren't you?" He didn't need to ask what she meant. There was no point in pretending otherwise. Yeah, something about this place? It's off. Ward rolled his eyes. Come on, both of you. We've run all the simulations. Everything's working exactly as it should. There's nothing here except a dead planet and a chance for us to start over. Amara's jaw tightened. That's what I'm afraid of. We're starting over. But at what cost? Kade remained silent, watching the landscape below as the machines continued their relentless march. The patches of green were spreading faster now, fueled by the technology they had brought with them. Soon, this world would be unrecognizable from the desolation they had found. And yet, for all the life they were breathing into it, something about it still felt wrong. The ruins they had uncovered were a constant reminder that this planet had seen its own downfall. They had uncovered relics of a lost civilization, one that had clearly understood the fragility of life. Had they once tried something similar, only to watch it slip away? As the hours passed, the first clouds began to form above, signaling the start of the artificially induced hydrological cycle. The sky, once so dry and unforgiving, now churned with moisture. But as Kade watched the clouds gather, his mind kept returning to the obelisk they had unearthed just days before. The symbols etched into its surface had haunted him ever since, their meaning still elusive, their purpose still unknown. That night, after the work had slowed and the machines had gone into standby, Kade sat alone near the edge of the camp. The distant hum of machinery had faded, replaced by the soft whisper of wind moving through the newly grown foliage. He stared up at the sky, watching as the clouds slowly thickened, casting the landscape into deep shadows. Amara approached from behind, her footsteps quiet but unmistakable. She sat beside him without a word, her gaze following his toward the darkening horizon. "There's something here," she said after a long silence. "Something we don't understand." Kade nodded, his thoughts still lingering on the ruins. "I know." Amara leaned back, resting her elbows on the ground. "I've been thinking about Earth," she admitted. "How we tried to fix things, tried to make it better, and yet it always seemed like we were just delaying the inevitable." Kade didn't respond immediately. He could sense the weight of her words, the memories of Earth's collapse hanging heavily between them. He had his own memories, of course, watching as the cities crumbled, as entire ecosystems vanished, as the planet itself seemed to fight back against the damage humanity had done. They had fought so hard to reverse the destruction, but in the end, it had been too late. The damage was too deep. "And now we're here," Amara continued, her voice barely more than a whisper, "trying to fix something else. But what if we're not fixing anything? What if we're just repeating the same mistakes?" Kade exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I've been asking myself the same thing." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind rustling through the growing greenery. The air had changed. It smelled fresher, cleaner, almost like the earth they had once known. But beneath that freshness, Kade could sense something else, something deeper. The planet wasn't just responding to the terraforming process, it was reacting to it. And that reaction felt wrong. "We're bringing life back to this place," Amara said finally. "But we don't know what that means." "Not really." Kade nodded. "We don't know what we're waking up." Amara stared out at the horizon, her eyes narrowed. "Do you think it's too late to stop?" Kade shook his head slowly. "I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe we've already gone too far." The night deepened around them, the darkness pressing in, but Kade couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something far bigger than they realized. The terraforming process had begun, and there was no stopping it now. But as the planet transformed beneath their feet, he couldn't help but wonder if they were about to face consequences they couldn't yet comprehend. This world had secrets, ancient ones, and now, with each step they took, they were getting closer to uncovering them. The question that hung in the air, unspoken but ever-present, was this: would they be able to handle what they found? Or had they, in their quest for survival, awakened something far more dangerous than they ever anticipated? The sky, once so still and clear, now roiled with clouds, and as Kade and Amara sat in the deepening gloom, the first drops of rain began to fall. As the second phase of terraforming unfolded, the air around the camp began to change in ways that defied explanation. The machinery that had been steadily churning away now worked at an accelerated pace, sending pulses of energy deep into the planet's core. But with every pulse, strange phenomena rippled across the landscape. First, it was the storms. They appeared suddenly, without warning. The sky, which had once been so calm, would darken in an instant, and torrents of rain would fall, hammering the ground with a fury that seemed unnatural. The wind whipped through the growing foliage, bending the trees that had only just begun to take root, and ripping away their fragile leaves. The storms, though unsettling, were only the beginning. At night, Kade found himself unable to sleep. The hum of the terraforming machines echoed in his ears, now a constant presence in the back of his mind. But there was something else too, a sound that had no source, a low vibration that seemed to come from beneath the surface. He could feel it in his bones when he stood still, like a distant heartbeat reverberating through the ground. "We need to slow down the process," Kade muttered to himself, his gaze fixed on the flashing indicators on his console. The data made no sense. According to the readings, the planet's atmosphere was stabilizing faster than they had predicted. The soil was rich with nutrients, the air breathable, and yet, there were anomalies. Ward, however, seemed unfazed by the developments. He stood at the console next to Kade, his eyes scanning the same data, but his expression remained resolute. "We're ahead of schedule," Ward remarked, his voice even. "Everything's working better than we expected." Kade shook his head. "That's the problem. Things shouldn't be happening this quickly. It's almost like the planet is reacting to us." Ward smirked, turning away from the console. "Isn't that the point? We're here to make this world live again." Kade could feel the tension building inside him, a knot tightening in his chest. "But at what cost? You've seen the storms. The data is showing shifts in the planet's magnetic field. That shouldn't be happening. We're triggering something, and we don't even know what it is." Ward didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the edge of the platform, where he had a clear view of the horizon. The trees had grown even taller in the past few days, their trunks thickening, their branches stretching outward. What had once been barren wasteland was now teeming with life, the lush greenery spreading further with each passing hour. "It's beautiful," Ward said softly, almost to himself. Kade joined him at the railing, his eyes scanning the landscape. It was beautiful in its own way. The transformation was undeniable. But beneath that beauty, something darker was stirring, something that felt beyond their control. In the distance, a flash of light caught Kade's eye. It wasn't a storm, this was different. It was more like a flicker, as if something beneath the surface had come alive. The ground trembled beneath his feet, subtle but unmistakable. Amara approached from behind, her expression tense. "You felt that too?" Kade nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Yeah, it's getting worse." Amara crossed her arms, her brow furrowed in thought. "We need to stop the project, at least temporarily. We can't keep pushing forward without understanding what's happening here." Ward turned to face her, his eyes hardening. "Stop the project? We've come too far to turn back now." Amara's gaze didn't waver. "And what if we're doing more harm than good? What if this planet isn't meant to be terraformed? We're seeing things we can't explain. The storms, the tremors, the magnetic shifts, this isn't just nature reacting. It feels like the planet itself is pushing back." Ward's jaw clenched. "This planet is dead. We're bringing it back to life. That's our mission." "But what if it's not dead?" Kade interjected, his voice firm. "What if it's been dormant, waiting for something? And now we're waking it up." The tension between them was palpable, the weight of their decisions pressing down on all of them. The mission had always been clear, to give life to a planet long since abandoned. But now, faced with the strange occurrences around them, the team was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. They didn't understand this world. They had assumed it was theirs to reshape, to rebuild. But what if it had its own will, its own agenda? The moral dilemma was unavoidable. If they stopped the project, they might save themselves from whatever force was now stirring beneath the surface. But if they pushed forward, they might discover the true potential of the planet, and perhaps, in doing so, secure a future for humanity. Holt, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke up. "We need to decide. Either we pull back, reassess, and figure out what's really going on here, or we push ahead and take the risk." Ward's eyes narrowed as he turned to Holt. "And what's your suggestion?" Holt sighed, rubbing the back of her neck. "I don't know. But I do know this: if we keep going blindly, we're asking for trouble." Amara nodded in agreement. "We can't just ignore the signs. We need to understand what we're dealing with." The decision wasn't going to be easy. Kade could see the conflict in Ward's eyes, the struggle between pride and reason. Ward wanted to finish what they had started, to prove that humanity could conquer even the most hostile of worlds. But Kade could sense the doubt creeping in, the growing realization that they might have bitten off more than they could chew. As they debated, another tremor shook the ground beneath them, more violent this time. The machinery groaned in response, its systems momentarily disrupted by the force. Kade steadied himself against the railing, his heart pounding in his chest. Whatever was happening, it was accelerating. "We don't have much time," Kade said, his voice low but urgent. "Something's happening beneath the surface, and it's not going to wait for us to make up our minds." Ward stared at the horizon, his face pale. For the first time, Kade saw fear in his eyes, a fear that mirrored his own. The planet was alive in ways they had never anticipated, and it was making its presence known. "Fine," Ward said after a long silence, his voice tense. "We paused the project, but only long enough to figure out what's going on. If we don't find anything, we're moving forward." Kade and Amara exchanged glances, both relieved and anxious at the same time. Pausing the project would buy them some time, but it wouldn't solve the underlying issue. They were treading into uncharted territory, and the planet was beginning to wake up. That night, Kade sat alone by the edge of the camp, watching the sky churn with dark clouds. The storms had become a near-constant presence now, appearing and disappearing with little warning. The wind howled through the trees, their branches swaying violently under the force of nature's wrath. But it wasn't just nature. Kade knew that now. There was something else at play, something far older and far more powerful than the technology they had brought with them. The relics they had uncovered hinted at a past that had been buried for centuries, a history that the planet itself had tried to erase. And now, as they dug deeper into its surface, they were stirring that history back to life. Amara joined him, her expression somber. "We need to be ready." Kade nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "For what?" Amara's voice was steady, but there was a heaviness to her words. "For whatever's coming." The two of them sat in silence, the wind whipping through the camp, the distant rumble of machinery blending with the roar of the storm. There were no answers, only questions. But one thing was clear: this planet was alive, and it was watching them. As the night deepened, Kade's thoughts drifted to Earth. They had left it behind, a world ravaged by humanity's ambition, a place where nature had finally fought back. And now, here they were, on a new planet, repeating the same mistakes. But this time, the planet wasn't going to wait for them to finish. It was waking up. And when it did, Kade wasn't sure if they would be able to handle what it had to show them. The sky crackled with lightning, illuminating the landscape for a brief moment. And in that moment, Kade saw something in the distance, something moving. It was too far away to make out clearly, but it was there, shifting in the darkness, a shadow against the horizon. Kade's breath caught in his throat. The planet was alive, and it was no longer content to remain dormant. Whatever they had awakened, it was only just beginning. The descent into the planet's depths was unlike anything Kade had imagined. He had expected a hollow, crumbling ruin, remnants of a forgotten age, but what greeted the team was something far different. The entrance, an unassuming fissure in the ground, had led them into a cavernous expanse. Strange, pulsing lights emanated from the walls, casting everything in a faint, otherworldly glow. The air here was thick with tension, almost as if it had been holding its breath for centuries, waiting for someone to intrude. Ward stood next to Kade, eyes scanning the alien architecture, his usual bravado tempered by a wary awe. "I've never seen anything like this," he muttered. Kade nodded, though his thoughts ran deeper. The architecture, while foreign, bore unsettling similarities to ancient structures back on Earth. There were symbols etched into the walls unfamiliar, yet evocative of long-lost civilizations. It wasn't the design itself that disturbed him, but the familiarity. It was as if the planet had been watching humanity for eons, silently mimicking Earth's rise and fall. Amara was the first to break the silence, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Do you feel that?" Kade didn't answer at first. He had felt it since they had entered the presence of something dormant, an energy that hummed through the walls, through the floor beneath their feet. It was subtle, but undeniable. "It's alive," Kade finally said, the words feeling heavier than he intended. Ward scoffed, though the usual edge in his voice was missing. "Alive? It's a city. It might have been something once, but it's long dead." Amara frowned, moving closer to a large stone structure in the center of the room. "Maybe, but whatever built this, it's still here, in some form." The room they had entered was vast, lined with intricate carvings that spiraled toward the ceiling. A strange energy seemed to pulse through the stone, as if the city itself had a heartbeat, slow and steady, yet waiting for the right moment to stir. As they moved further into the underground metropolis, the sense of unease deepened. The structures were immense, towering above them like ancient gods. Statues, larger than life, stood frozen in mid-motion, their features worn by time, but unmistakably human-like. The team's footsteps echoed through the silence, a constant reminder of how alone they were in this forgotten place. And yet, Kade couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Eventually, they reached the heart of the city, a massive, circular chamber. At its center, an enormous stone monolith stood, its surface covered in symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. It was unlike anything they had seen so far. The stone felt older, more deliberate, as if it had been placed there for a purpose. Kade stepped closer, drawn to the monolith. His fingers brushed the surface, and the faint hum he had felt earlier intensified. His mind filled with images fleeting, fragmented glimpses of worlds long gone, of civilizations rising and falling, of life and death, over and over again. He stumbled backward, his heart racing. Ward caught his arm, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. "What the hell just happened?" I don't know," Kade breathed, his chest tight. He felt as if he had glimpsed something far beyond his understanding, something that had been hidden away for eons. It was as though the artifact had shown him a truth too vast, too incomprehensible to fully grasp. Amara stepped forward, her hand hovering above the stone. She hesitated, glancing back at Kade. "You felt something, didn't you?" Kade nodded slowly. "It's like the planet's trying to tell us something. Something about cycles, life, death, rebirth. It's all connected." Ward's skepticism was immediate. "This is getting ridiculous. We're scientists, not mystics. There's a rational explanation for all of this." Kade shook his head. "This isn't something we can explain with data. I don't know how to describe it, but this place, it's alive in ways we can't understand." Ward's eyes narrowed. "You're starting to sound like one of those doomsday prophets. We're here to terraform this world, not commune with ancient rocks." Amara's voice was soft but firm. "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe we're trying to force something that wasn't meant to be changed." The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down on them. It wasn't just about the planet anymore. It was about something larger, something that transcended their mission. The more time they spent here, the more it became clear that their presence had disrupted something ancient, something sacred. The rift between them was growing, not just in their philosophy, but in their understanding of the mission. Kade could see it in Ward's eyes, the disbelief, the stubborn refusal to accept anything that didn't fit within his worldview. To Ward, this was still just a job, a means to an end. But Kade couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something profound, something that had the potential to change everything they thought they knew. As they continued to explore, the sense of unease only deepened. The city's dormant energies seemed to pulse in time with their movements, responding to their presence in ways that defied logic. Statues that had stood still for centuries seemed to shift ever so slightly, their once blank expressions now filled with silent judgment. The deeper they went, the more Kade felt the pull of the monolith. It was as though it had imprinted something on him, a fragment of a truth he couldn't yet comprehend. The visions it had shown him were distant and fragmented, but they had left a mark on his soul. Amara, too, seemed changed by the experience. Her usual sharpness had given way to a quiet contemplation, as though she were wrestling with something deeper than the mission at hand. Kade wondered if she had seen the same things he had, if the monolith had whispered the same truths to her. Ward, on the other hand, was growing increasingly frustrated. He saw their caution as hesitation, their curiosity as weakness. To him, every delay was another failure, another step away from completing their mission. "We're wasting time," Ward snapped, his patience fraying. "We didn't come here to marvel at old rocks. We need to get back on track." But Kade wasn't ready to leave. He had felt something in this place, something ancient and powerful, and he couldn't walk away from it just yet. "There's more to this than we realize. We can't just ignore it." Ward's eyes flashed with anger. "You're letting superstition cloud your judgment." "It's not superstition," Kade shot back, his voice rising. "This planet is alive in ways we don't understand. If we keep pushing forward without understanding what we're dealing with, we're going to regret it." The two men stared each other down, the tension between them thick and palpable. Amara stood between them, her expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a recognition of the deeper conflict that was unfolding. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about belief, about destiny, about the choices that would define who they were and what they stood for. As the argument simmered down, Kade turned back toward the monolith. The symbols etched into its surface seemed to pulse with energy, beckoning him closer. He couldn't help but wonder if the answers they sought lay within this ancient city, answers not just to the mysteries of the planet, but to the mysteries of their own existence. In that moment, Kade realized that the true challenge of their mission wasn't about terraforming a world. It was about confronting the deeper truths that lay hidden beneath the surface truths that had the power to reshape not just the planet, but their understanding of life itself. The sky above the planet's surface had taken on a peculiar hue. Where once it was a desolate, empty expanse of grays and browns, now faint streaks of color rippled across the atmosphere, as though the air itself had begun to respond to the planet's awakening. Amara stood at the edge of the base, eyes fixed on the swirling sky, her breath steady but her heart uneasy. Beneath her feet, the earth hummed softly, as if breathing in tandem with the strange shifts above. The planet, once still and lifeless, was stirring in ways they had only begun to understand. "Kade," she called, her voice tight, though she couldn't quite explain why. "You should see this." Kade joined her, wiping the sweat from his forehead as he followed her gaze. The sky shimmered with iridescent light, a slow, undulating wave that moved as if guided by some unseen force. It was beautiful, mesmerizing even, but there was something in the way it moved, something deliberate, like the planet itself was responding to their presence. It felt intentional. "I don't like it," Kade muttered. He rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes never leaving the sky. "It feels like we're being watched." Amara didn't reply. She didn't need to. There was no denying that the changes had accelerated ever since they'd discovered the underground city. The strange energy beneath the surface had grown stronger, more apparent. The machines they had set to terraform the planet were doing their job, but the land was changing too quickly, in ways none of them had anticipated. Their equipment flickered more often now. Power surges, sudden malfunctions, strange readings that made no sense all had become regular occurrences. There were times when it felt as if the planet itself was interfering with their technology, a silent rebellion against their efforts. "We need to reconsider this," Amara finally said, breaking the silence between them. Kade's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had been thinking the same thing, though he wasn't ready to admit it yet. The mission had seemed so clear when they'd arrived: terraform the planet, bring it back to life, create a new home for humanity. But now everything felt uncertain. A faint tremor ran through the ground, and both of them tensed, glancing at each other in quiet alarm. It wasn't the first tremor they'd felt, but this one was different. There was an intensity to it, as if the planet itself was waking up, shaking off a long, deep slumber. Suddenly, the comms crackled to life, breaking the tense stillness. Ward's voice came through, sharp and insistent. "You two need to get back here, now." Kade and Amara exchanged a quick glance before sprinting toward the base. Whatever Ward had found, it wasn't good. When they entered the command room, Ward was standing over the main console, his face lit by the erratic flashing of the screen. His expression was grim. He didn't even look up as they entered. "What is it?" Kade asked, his chest still heaving from the run. Ward jabbed a finger at the screen. "Look." The display showed a series of energy readings, but none of them made any sense. Spikes of raw power surged in seemingly random patterns, growing more erratic by the second. But that wasn't what caught their attention. In the corner of the display, a strange signal had appeared, a repeating pattern, rhythmic and deliberate. It was faint, but unmistakable. "Is that?" Amara's voice trailed off. "It's a signal," Ward confirmed, his voice edged with frustration. "Something is trying to contact us." Kade leaned in closer, studying the signal. It wasn't like any transmission he'd ever seen. It was almost organic, like a heartbeat, steady, insistent. It was as if the planet itself was reaching out to them. "Has anyone responded?" Kade asked, his mind racing with possibilities. Ward shook his head. "No, I'm not even sure we can. It's too complex, too alien. But it's there, and it's getting stronger." Amara frowned, her eyes narrowing as she studied the signal. Do you think this is connected to the changes we've been seeing? The storms, the energy surges?" "Maybe," Kade admitted, "but it could be something else, something bigger." There was a long, heavy silence as they all considered the implications. The planet had been changing rapidly, almost as if it were reacting to their presence. But this was something more. It was as if the world itself had become aware of them, and now it was reaching out. Amara turned to Ward, her expression tense. "What do you think?" Ward's eyes were hard. "I think we keep going. Whatever this is, it doesn't change our mission. We were sent here to terraform this planet, and that's what we're going to do." "But what if the planet doesn't want us to?" Kade's question hung in the air, a challenge that none of them were prepared to answer. Ward's jaw clenched. "It's a planet, Kade. It doesn't get a choice." Kade's eyes flickered with frustration. "You don't know that. We don't know what we're dealing with here. For all we know, this place could be alive." "Enough with that nonsense," Ward snapped, his voice rising. "We're not here to play philosophers. We have a job to do, and we're going to finish it." Kade stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "This isn't just about the mission anymore. This is about something much bigger. We need to think about the consequences, about what we're doing to this planet, and what it might do to us in return." Ward glared at him, his anger barely contained. "You're letting fear cloud your judgment." "No," Kade said quietly, his voice steady. "I'm thinking clearly for the first time." Amara watched the two men, her face unreadable, but inside she felt the weight of the decision bearing down on all of them. Kade was right. Something was happening here, something they couldn't fully understand, and continuing the terraforming might provoke something far more dangerous than they realized. The signal on the screen pulsed again, stronger this time, as if whatever was reaching out to them had grown impatient. It was waiting for a response. The question was, what would they say? The room seemed to shrink around them, the walls closing in as the weight of the moment settled on their shoulders. The mission, the choices they had made up until now, The future they were trying to create, it all seemed fragile, precarious. "What if we're wrong?" Amara's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried across the room like a thunderclap. Kade turned to her, his eyes softening. "That's what we need to figure out, before it's too late." But Ward was already shaking his head. "There's no turning back now." As the argument simmered, the signal continued to pulse, growing louder, more insistent. It was as if the planet itself was demanding an answer, and for the first time, Kade wasn't sure they had the right one. The tension between the three of them had never felt sharper. Trust was fraying, stretched thin by fear, uncertainty, and the growing realization that their mission might be spiraling out of control. They were on the precipice of something none of them could fully understand. And the planet, in its strange, silent way, was waiting for them to decide what kind of future they would choose. The communications console blinked to life with a steady stream of encrypted transmissions. Reports from far-off worlds, surveillance feeds, cryptic directives from shadowy corners of the galaxy. The room hummed with a quiet urgency, the low thrum of machines a reminder that out there, beyond this planet's atmosphere, far-reaching eyes were fixed upon them. Amara stood alone in the command center, her gaze locked on the star map displayed in front of her. Each glowing point represented a distant power, a force that had watched humanity rise from the ashes of Earth's destruction and spread out into the cosmos. Now, those same powers had begun to stir, not with admiration, but with something more calculating. The galaxy had noticed their actions, and it was moving. On one corner of the map, the Oberon Collective's symbol glowed faintly. Known for their expansionist tendencies, the Oberons had always viewed humanity with a kind of detached suspicion, their reports rife with warnings about human ambition. The moment word of the terraforming project had leaked, their interest had peaked. For them, this planet wasn't just another dead rock being revived. It was potential raw, untamed, and dangerous. Further along the map, the Atrian Federation's emblem pulsed with a different energy. The Atrians, cautious and methodical, saw the project as something else entirely, a test of will. Their agents had already made contact, offering their guidance in subtle, indirect ways. But everyone knew what it meant when the Federation offered help. It came with strings, long, invisible ones. And then there were the Jur, who hadn't bothered with diplomacy or subtext. They had sent a formal warning, a declaration that any further tampering with the planet's natural state would be met with consequences. The Jur's ancient doctrine was clear: the balance of life and death must not be disturbed. Amara could still hear the cold precision of their message echoing in her mind. "You meddle with forces beyond your understanding." Amara exhaled slowly, her hand resting on the console. The weight of these galactic powers pressed in from all sides, suffocating in its complexity. Each of them had their own agenda, their own reasons for paying attention to the planet's transformation. But underneath it all, Amara knew the truth. Humanity was at the center of it now, and they would be judged for what came next. The door behind her slid open, and Kade stepped in, his expression dark. "We've intercepted another transmission from the Oberons," he said, his voice low. "They're positioning ships near the outer perimeter. No direct threats yet, but it's clear they're not just watching anymore." Amara nodded, her gaze never leaving the star map. "They're waiting, testing us." "And the Federation?" Kade asked. "Still offering their assistance," she replied, her tone edged with irony. "But you know what that means. They're waiting for us to make a mistake, so they can sweep in and save the situation, on their terms." Kade clenched his jaw, his frustration evident. They all want a piece of this planet. They're just waiting to see how far we'll push it before they step in. Amara turned to face him, her eyes sharp. "It's more than that, Kade. This isn't just about the planet anymore. They're watching us. What we do here will define how they see humanity in the future. If we succeed, it proves that we can wield power over life itself. But if we fail—" Kade finished the thought for her. "If we fail, they'll never trust us again. We'll be seen as reckless, dangerous, a threat." Amara crossed the room, her movements slow and deliberate, as if each step carried the weight of the decision she knew was coming. The political intrigue unfolding around them was a web of invisible strings, each tugging at them in different directions. Factions vied for control, for influence, for power over this world, and the people trying to shape it. "We need to decide how far we're willing to go," she said quietly. "Not just with the planet, but with them. The Oberons, the Federation, the Jur, they all have their eyes on us, waiting for us to misstep. But we didn't come here to let them decide what humanity is capable of." Kade watched her closely, sensing the deeper conflict in her words. "And what if we can't control what happens next? What if this planet? What if we've already crossed a line we can't come back from?" Amara paused, her eyes narrowing as she considered his question. The air between them felt heavy, thick with unspoken possibilities. She knew they were walking a fine line between creation and destruction, between control and surrender. The planet's changes, the strange signals, the awakening machinery, it all pointed to something larger than them, something ancient and far more complex than they could grasp. And now the galaxy was watching, waiting to see how they would navigate the consequences of their actions. Kade stepped closer, his voice a murmur. "We can still stop this. We can pull back, slow down the terraforming, give ourselves more time to understand what's happening here. Maybe that's what they're waiting for us to prove we're not reckless, that we're willing to listen." Amara shook her head slowly. "If we pull back now, we'll never get another chance. The Oberons will claim the planet, the Federation will twist it into their own project, and the Jur will make sure no one ever sets foot here again. We have to finish what we started." "But at what cost?" Kade pressed. Amara's eyes softened for a moment, the question lingering between them. There was no easy answer, no clear path forward. The choices they made now would ripple out into the galaxy, shaping not only their future, but the future of humanity as a whole. She turned back to the star map, her fingers tracing the paths of the galactic powers, each one pulling them in a different direction. "We're not just here to terraform a planet," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "We're here to prove something to them, to ourselves. That humanity is more than just survivors. That we can shape the future, even when the odds are against us." Kade stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "And if we're wrong?" Amara's eyes flickered with a quiet determination. "Then we'll deal with it, but we won't let them decide who we are." The room fell silent, the hum of the machines the only sound as they stood together, two figures caught between the enormity of their mission and the complexities of the galaxy around them. Out there, beyond the planet's surface, the Oberons and the Federation continued to circle like predators, waiting for a moment of weakness. And the Jur, with their ancient doctrines, watched with cold calculation, ready to strike if the balance was tipped too far. But here, in the quiet of the command center, Amara knew one thing for certain. They couldn't afford to hesitate. Not now, not with everything on the line. As she turned back to the console, a new transmission flashed across the screen. It was from the Atrian Federation, offering assistance once again. Though the undertone was clear, they weren't asking. They were positioning themselves, preparing for whatever came next. Amara glanced at Kade, her expression unreadable. "Looks like the galaxy isn't going to wait much longer." Kade nodded grimly. "No, it's not." The tension in the air was palpable as the crew gathered in the central chamber of the base. The usual hum of the machines around them felt distant, as if the very heart of the place had slowed to match the rhythm of their unspoken emotions. The light was dim, casting long, distorted shadows across the metal walls. Conversations were quieter, glances more deliberate, every movement weighted by the uncertainty of their situation. Amara leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, watching as the group splintered into quiet conversations. Kade was pacing, his steps uneven as he moved in tight circles, hands clenched at his sides. His usual calm was gone, replaced by something sharper, something raw. It wasn't just the external pressures of the galactic powers closing in, it was everything that had been building inside their small team, bubbling beneath the surface, now too volatile to contain. At the center of the room, Maris and Ezra stood together, their voices low but tense, the space between them filled with an unspoken argument. Amara could tell from the way Ezra's shoulders tightened, from the way Maris averted her eyes, that whatever they were discussing had long passed the point of reconciliation. She let her eyes drift over to where Lisbeth sat alone at the edge of the chamber. Her posture was rigid, hands folded neatly in her lap, but the flicker of her gaze toward Ezra told another story. There had always been something between them, a quiet connection, but now it felt strained, on the verge of snapping. Amara sighed, pushing off the wall and moving toward the console, needing to do something, anything to break the tension. But as she approached the display, Kade's voice cut through the silence. "This is falling apart," he muttered, not to anyone in particular, but loud enough for everyone to hear. He stopped pacing, turning to face the group, his eyes dark and accusatory. "We're on the brink of something huge, and we're acting like children, too distracted by our own emotions to see what's coming." Ezra, still standing close to Maris, looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" Kade's laugh was bitter, his frustration boiling over. "It means that we're here to terraform a planet, to make something of this place, and instead, we're tearing ourselves apart over things that don't even matter." Amara frowned, stepping closer to where Kade stood, but not interrupting. This wasn't about the mission. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the tension in his stance. There was something deeper at play, something personal. "You think none of this matters?" Ezra shot back, his voice rising. He glanced at Maris, then at Lisbeth, his expression unreadable. "What about us? What about everything we've been through? You think that just disappears because we're working on some grand mission?" Kade took a step forward, his frustration palpable. "That's exactly what I'm saying. We're supposed to be professionals, but we're acting like—" Maris cut him off, her voice quiet but firm. "Like what? Humans?" Her eyes met his, and for a moment, there was something vulnerable there, something fragile. "We didn't stop being people just because we took on this mission, Kade. We still feel, we still love, we still hurt." The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable. Amara shifted her weight, watching as the tension between them twisted into something more personal, more dangerous. Ezra took a step toward Maris, his hand brushing against her arm, but she pulled away, her expression guarded. His face fell, and Amara could see the hurt in his eyes, the uncertainty that had been brewing for weeks now. Whatever had been between them, whatever unspoken connection they had shared was unraveling before their eyes. "I thought we were in this together," Ezra said, his voice low, almost pleading. Maris looked away, her arms wrapped around herself protectively. "Things change," she whispered, but the words felt heavy, final. Amara could feel the fracture lines forming, could sense the way their group was splintering. It wasn't just the external pressures of the mission or the watching eyes of the galaxy, it was the way they were turning inward, letting their personal conflicts bleed into everything they did. The weight of their emotions was becoming too much to bear. Lisbeth, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "We've all changed. This planet, this mission, it's made us confront things about ourselves we weren't ready for." Her eyes met Ezra's, and for a brief moment, Amara saw something pass between them, a flicker of understanding, of shared pain. But then Lisbeth looked away, and the moment was gone. Kade exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "So what now? Do we just fall apart? Let this mission fail because we can't get over ourselves?" Amara stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "We don't let it fail, but we also don't ignore what's happening here." She gestured to the group, her eyes serious. "We're not just a team. We're people. And right now, those personal stakes are just as important as the mission itself." Ezra looked at her, his expression torn. "So what do we do?" Amara hesitated, then spoke slowly, carefully. "We deal with it. We face what's happening, instead of pretending it's not there." She glanced at Maris, then at Kade. "That means being honest, with ourselves and with each other." The words hung in the air, and for a moment no one spoke. Then Maris finally looked up, her eyes meeting Amara's. "And if that means we don't make it through this together?" Amara's gaze softened. "Then we deal with that too. But we won't know until we try." The room was quiet again, the tension still lingering, but there was something different now, a sense of possibility, a chance for something to change, if they were willing to face it head-on. Slowly, Ezra moved closer to Maris, his hand hovering just inches from hers. She didn't pull away this time, but she didn't reach out either. The space between them was filled with years of shared history, of unspoken promises and lingering doubts. Kade, meanwhile, had stopped pacing, his frustration simmering down to a quiet resignation. He still looked tense, still angry, but there was something more reflective in his eyes now, as if he was finally starting to see the cracks in their foundation. Lisbeth watched them all, her expression unreadable. She had always been the quiet one, the observer, but Amara could tell there was more beneath the surface. There always had been. As the group slowly dispersed, retreating to their corners of the base, Amara remained standing by the console, her mind racing. The mission, the planet, the galaxy, it all seemed so distant compared to the intensity of what had just unfolded. Love, betrayal, loyalty, and doubt. They had all been simmering beneath the surface for so long, and now they were finally boiling over. But even as the fractures deepened, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. There was still something left to fight for, something beyond the mission, beyond the planet. Something that bound them together, even in the face of everything that threatened to tear them apart. She just hoped it would be enough. The team's movements were a blend of mechanical efficiency and anxious anticipation. The great excavation had revealed a cavernous chamber beneath the surface of the once dead planet. Inside, a pulsating core of radiant energy lay dormant, cradled within an intricate lattice of alien architecture. The chamber's walls, etched with symbols that defied human understanding, hummed with a faint, almost musical resonance. The scene was set. The first glimpse of a power that had slumbered for millennia was now open to their scrutiny. What appeared to be a crystalline heart glowed with a subdued light that seemed to breathe. It was as if the planet itself exhaled a long-held breath, releasing an energy that had once been the very essence of its life. Dr. Alara Voss, the mission's lead, stood at the threshold of the chamber, her face illuminated by the eerie glow. The light cast shadows across her features, sharpening the lines of fatigue and worry. Her gaze was fixed on the pulsating core, her thoughts racing faster than her heart. "It's magnificent," whispered Dr. Samuel Carter, her second in command, as he adjusted the settings on his portable scanner. His voice, typically steady and rational, carried a tremor of awe. This could revolutionize energy production across the galaxy, or it could be a catastrophe. Ella nodded, but her mind was consumed by the weight of their discovery. The chamber was not merely an energy source. It was a testament to a civilization that had once wielded such power and ultimately succumbed to it. The implications were enormous. "Activate the scanner," Alara ordered, her voice firm despite the turmoil inside. "We need to understand its full capabilities before making any decisions." The scanner's software filled the chamber, its beams slicing through the ambient light. Data began streaming in, displaying fluctuations in energy levels and structural stability. The readings were both promising and alarming. Dr. Carter, his face drawn tight with concentration, relayed the findings. "The core's energy output is stable, but there are intermittent spikes. It's as if it's reacting to our presence." Alara's gaze swept over the chamber. The symbols on the walls seemed to pulse in rhythm with the core's fluctuations. "This place, it's alive in a way we didn't anticipate. We need to be cautious. There's more at play here than just raw power." As the team continued their analysis, the internal debate grew more heated. The core's potential for harnessing energy could provide solutions to many of the galaxy's problems, but the risk of its destructive power loomed large. The very essence of their mission was at stake. In the confines of their temporary base camp, tension among the team members was palpable. Alara convened a meeting to discuss their next steps, aware that every word carried the weight of their future. The team assembled, each member's face reflecting their inner turmoil. "We've reached a critical juncture," Alara began, her voice steady despite the fatigue evident in her eyes. "The core has immense potential, but its true nature remains a mystery. We must decide whether to proceed with our plans or destroy it to prevent any possible danger." Dr. Carter's expression was grave. "This energy could solve countless problems across the galaxy, but we don't fully understand its effects. There's a risk that it could destabilize the planet or worse." Dr. Voss, her eyes reflecting the same uncertainty, added, "If we destroy the core, we may never know what we've lost. But if we proceed and something goes wrong, the consequences could be catastrophic." As the discussion unfolded, the team's divisions became more pronounced. Dr. Leela Reyes, the mission's biologist, argued passionately for preserving the core, driven by the hope it could bring new life to the galaxy. "Imagine the possibilities," she urged. "A power source that could sustain entire civilizations. This could be our greatest achievement." Yet, not all were swayed by her optimism. Dr. Raj Patel, the mission's ethicist, posed a sobering counterpoint. "Are we willing to gamble with the unknown? We have a duty to consider the broader implications. The potential for destruction is as real as the promise of salvation." The debate continued late into the night, with each team member presenting their arguments, their personal fears and hopes shaping their perspectives. Each argument carried weight, revealing deeper truths about their motivations and fears. Alara found herself at the heart of this moral and philosophical crucible. Her own internal struggle mirrored the team's debate. Her past experiences with Earth's environmental collapse haunted her thoughts. The responsibility of deciding the fate of this ancient power weighed heavily on her. The night wore on, and as the discussions grew quieter, Alara wandered outside the base camp, seeking solace under the vast, star-studded sky. The silence of the barren planet contrasted sharply with the chaos within her mind. The stars, distant and indifferent, seemed to offer no answers, only the endless expanse of space stretching out before her. She reflected on humanity's place in the universe, a species driven by ambition and curiosity, often at the cost of understanding the broader consequences of their actions. The choice before them was not just about harnessing power. It was about confronting their own hubris and recognizing the limits of their control. Returning to the base, Alara made her way to her quarters, where she reviewed the data collected. Each piece of information, each reading, was a fragment of a larger puzzle she needed to solve. She knew that the decision they faced was not merely a technical or scientific one. It was deeply philosophical and moral. As dawn approached, the team reconvened, their faces drawn but resolute. Alara addressed them with a sense of gravity that matched the moment's weight. "We stand on the brink of a decision that could shape not only our future, but the galaxy's as well. We must consider every angle, every possibility." The core's energy continued to pulse in the depths of the chamber, a silent witness to the choices they would make. The planet's hidden power remained both a promise and a peril, its ultimate fate hanging in the balance. The tension was tangible, the stakes high. The team's decision would not only determine their mission's outcome, but also test their collective and individual resolve. In the quiet that followed, each member grappled with their own thoughts, aware that their next steps would define not only their legacy, but also the future of countless others. The chamber's hum seemed to echo their uncertainty, a reminder of the profound implications of their actions. The hum of the ancient machinery had become a constant in their lives. Beneath the surface of the planet, the once dormant energy source had stirred, its pulses now rhythmic and almost sentient. The team, divided and weary, found themselves at the epicenter of a galaxy-wide storm. The shuttle's exterior lights sliced through the thickening atmosphere as it descended toward the planet's surface. Outside the reinforced windows, the barren landscape had been transformed into a vivid, almost alien terrain. The terraforming efforts had not only breathed new life into the planet, but had also awakened something far older and more complex. The planet itself seemed to be holding its breath, its surface crackling with latent energy. In the control room of the planetary base, tension was palpable. The air felt thick with a mixture of excitement and dread as the team prepared for the imminent arrival of representatives from various galactic factions. The sense of anticipation was like a live wire, sparking every now and then with bursts of anxious chatter or terse silence. Commander Alara stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the view outside. Her hands, once steady and confident, now trembled slightly as she navigated the complexities of the current situation. The political ramifications of their project had reached unprecedented levels. The galaxy watched with a mixture of fascination and fear, their intentions as varied as their species. "We have incoming," the communications officer announced. A series of blips on the control panel confirmed the approach of multiple spacecraft. Each one represented a different faction with its own agendas and biases. The imminent arrival of these representatives meant that the decisions made in the coming hours would resonate through the galaxy. Ala turned to her team, her expression serious. "This is where the real challenge begins. We need to show restraint and focus. This planet's fate and our own depends on it." Dr. Kieran, the lead scientist, could hardly contain his anxiety. His work had revealed the full extent of the planet's hidden power, an energy source with a potential to reshape or obliterate. The discovery had come with a heavy realization: the planet's rebirth might be accompanied by catastrophic consequences. "The energy fluctuations are increasing," Dr. Kieran said, pointing to the monitors. The data displayed was a chaotic mess of spikes and troughs, indicating an unstable yet immensely powerful force. "We've triggered something far greater than we anticipated." Alara's gaze swept over the rest of the team. Each member was absorbed in their own tasks, their faces reflecting the strain of the situation. They were about to confront the galaxy's most powerful entities, each with its own agenda. The stakes could not be higher. The arrival of the galactic envoys was a spectacle of its own. The sky was filled with ships of all sizes and designs, each a testament to the diverse cultures of the galaxy. They descended onto the planet's surface with a blend of military precision and ceremonial grandeur. As the representatives disembarked, their presence underscored the gravity of the moment. Alara met with the leaders of the factions in a makeshift diplomatic pavilion erected on the edge of the planetary base. The pavilion was a stark contrast to the rugged, alien terrain outside, with its polished surfaces and holographic displays. The factions were represented by beings of various shapes and sizes, their expressions a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and outright hostility. Commander Alara, the lead envoy of the United Collective, began, their voice a melodious blend of multiple tones. "We have come to address the consequences of your actions. The galaxy demands to understand the full implications of what you have unleashed." Alara took a deep breath, her mind racing. "We sought to revive a dead world, to create a new beginning. We did not anticipate that this world held such profound power." The envoy's gaze was unyielding. "Your project has stirred an ancient force. The balance of power in this galaxy is delicate. Any disruption could have unforeseen ramifications." The conversation quickly turned into a heated debate. Each faction brought forward their concerns, ranging from the ethical implications of awakening a dormant planet to the potential threat it posed to galactic stability. The weight of their scrutiny pressed down on Alara and her team, magnifying the internal conflicts they had been grappling with. Back at the base, the team was on high alert. The energy source's readings were becoming increasingly erratic. Reports from the field described strange phenomena, shadows moving against the grain of light, inexplicable weather patterns, and a sense of unease that permeated the environment. The planet seemed to be responding to the galactic attention, as if it were aware of the scrutiny it was under. Dr. Kieran was deep in discussion with his team, his face a mask of grim determination. "We need to make a decision. The energy levels are unstable, and there are indications that further disturbance could trigger a catastrophic event. We might have to consider evacuation or containment measures." Alara felt a pang of guilt. The dream of restoring a dead world was unraveling into a nightmare. The grandeur of the project seemed to diminish in the face of potential annihilation. As she stared at the data, a profound realization struck her. Their actions, driven by the best of intentions, had inadvertently set off a chain of events that might spell disaster not just for them, but for the entire galaxy. The philosophical depth of their predicament became starkly clear. The choices they made were no longer just about the planet or their mission. They were about humanity's place in the galaxy, its legacy, and the cost of ambition. The debate with the galactic envoys was not merely a diplomatic maneuver, it was a reflection of deeper questions about creation and destruction, about what it means to wield power and the responsibilities that come with it. As the tension escalated, the team was faced with an agonizing decision: to protect the galaxy by potentially destroying their creation, or to risk everything by pressing forward with the terraforming process. Each path held its own set of moral and existential questions. The weight of these choices hung heavily over them, a reminder of the profound implications of their actions. The galaxy watched and waited, its gaze a mixture of apprehension and fascination. The outcome of this confrontation would determine not only the fate of the planet, but also the future of humanity's role in the cosmos. The next steps were uncertain. The characters' internal conflicts and external pressures converged into a single, poignant question: what legacy would humanity leave behind, and at what cost? The air in the command center hung heavy, weighed down by an inescapable sense of impending loss. The hum of machinery, once a constant companion, now felt intrusive, a reminder that everything they had worked for might soon slip away. The planet, now teeming with life and energy, had become a battleground not only for survival, but for the soul of their mission. Elara stood by the large viewport, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The terrain outside had shifted yet again. What had once been a barren, desolate wasteland was now teeming with unpredictable energy. The ground shimmered with a faint, iridescent glow, a product of the planet's transformation. It was beautiful, yet unnerving, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the tension. The team's voices faded into the background as Allah considered the weight of the decision before her. Each member of the crew had a role to play, but one of them would have to step forward now, make the ultimate sacrifice. There was no other way. The energy source they had unearthed was too unstable, too powerful to contain through conventional means. "Commander," Dr. Kieran's voice cut through her thoughts. He approached with hurried steps, a sense of urgency in his every move. His face was lined with exhaustion, the strain of the past weeks etched deeply into his features. "We've confirmed it. The energy readings are off the charts, and they're rising exponentially. We have minutes, hours, at best, before the whole system overloads." Elara turned to face him, her jaw clenched. "Options?" He hesitated, the answer hanging heavy between them. His eyes searched hers, looking for an alternative, for anything that didn't involve what they both knew had to be done. "There's one way," Kieran said quietly. "If we divert the full energy output and create a controlled release, it could buy us time. But someone needs to stay behind to manage the system. Manual control is the only way to stabilize it long enough for the rest of us to evacuate." Elara's heart sank. She had known it would come to this, but the finality of the situation weighed on her like an anchor. This was more than just a mission. Now this was about the lives of everyone in the team, the factions that watched their every move, and the future of the galaxy itself. Every moment, every breath carried the weight of all they had set in motion. Across the room, Lieutenant Ash stood by one of the auxiliary control panels, his gaze distant. The lieutenant had always been the steady hand, the one who kept the team grounded. His calm exterior had guided them through more than one close call. But today, there was something different about him, a stillness, a quiet resolve that set him apart from the flurry of activity around him. Without a word, Ash moved toward Elara and Kieran, his footsteps soft but deliberate. He stopped just a few paces away and waited until Elara met his eyes. "I'll do it," he said simply. Elara's breath caught in her throat. She had expected this, but the reality of hearing it out loud hit her harder than she anticipated. Ash was volunteering. He didn't need to. There had been no direct order, no obligation. But the look in his eyes left no room for doubt. He understood the situation, the cost, and he had made his choice. Ash, Elara started, her voice barely more than a whisper. You don't have to. I do, Ash interrupted, his voice firm but without anger. His gaze softened as he looked at her, then at Kieran, and finally at the rest of the team scattered throughout the room. We all knew the risks when we signed on for this. The planet. What we've awakened here. It's beyond what we ever imagined. But if we're going to save the others, someone has to stay behind and see this through. That someone is me. There was a moment of silence as his words settled into the air, as final and unyielding as the planet beneath their feet. Elara felt a tightness in her chest, a tension she couldn't quite shake. Ash had been with her from the beginning, a constant presence, a quiet pillar of strength. The idea of losing him, of leaving him behind, felt like an impossible burden to bear. Don't try to change my mind, Ash added softly. This is my decision. Kieran turned away, unable to look him in the eye. Elara stood frozen for a moment, her thoughts racing. But there was no time to argue, no time to find another way. Ash had already made up his mind. She swallowed hard, nodding slowly. All right, she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. We'll get everyone else out. The rest of the team had gathered now, having overheard the exchange. The weight of the moment hung in the air, a shared understanding passing between them. No one questioned Ash's decision, but the impact of it was felt by all. Ash turned toward the console, where the complex array of controls awaited him. The system was temperamental, its erratic power surges making it nearly impossible to predict. If he could stabilize it for long enough, the team could make it to the shuttle and get off the planet. But it would require constant manual adjustment. Every second mattered. Elara placed a hand on his shoulder, the gesture brief but filled with 1,000 unspoken words. She couldn't bring herself to say goodbye. There were no words for this moment, for what he was about to do. I'll make sure the mission isn't in vain, Ash said quietly, his voice carrying a quiet determination. We came here to do something important. I won't let it end in failure. Elara nodded, fighting back the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. We'll never forget this, Ash. None of us will. He smiled, a faint, almost bittersweet expression, and turned back to the console. As the rest of the team prepared for their departure, the atmosphere in the control room shifted. The sounds of frantic activity, of beeping consoles and hurried conversations, faded into the background. Time itself seemed to stretch, every second an eternity. For Ash, these final moments were a strange mix of clarity and weightlessness. He focused on the controls, his mind sharp, his hands moving with practiced precision. But in the spaces between actions, he thought of the people he was leaving behind. The shuttle engines roared to life, a low rumble that reverberated through the base. Elara, Kieran, and the others boarded without fanfare, their faces etched with the grief they didn't have the time or luxury to express. The doors sealed shut, and the engines fired, lifting the craft into the air. Ash watched through the viewport as the shuttle rose into the darkening sky, a trail of light cutting through the planet's atmosphere. His focus returned to the console, where the energy levels continued to spike unpredictably. The system was buckling under the strain, and the volatile power of the planet threatened to tear everything apart. Ash's fingers danced across the controls, making adjustments, rerouting power, diverting energy, each action buying the team precious seconds, just enough time to get away. The console hissed and sparked as the overload reached its peak. Ash's chest tightened, the heat from the machine radiating against his skin. But he didn't flinch. He had made his choice. He had accepted the cost. As the planet's surface began to tremble, the energy coursing through it reaching critical mass, Ash closed his eyes. He thought of Elara, of the mission, of everything they had worked for. And then, in the final seconds, he thought of peace. The explosion was not sudden, not violent. It was more like a release, a breath held too long finally exhaled. The energy burst forth from the planet's core, rippling outward in waves of light and heat. In that moment, everything shifted. The ground, the air, the very fabric of the world itself seemed to bend and reshape, responding to the sacrifice made within its depths. Ash was gone. In the shuttle, Elara felt the reverberation, a deep, mournful pulse that echoed through the hall. She closed her eyes, her hands gripping the armrest tightly. The weight of the loss hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath, her thoughts. Ash had been more than just a lieutenant, more than a team member. He had been a friend, a guide, a symbol of everything they had fought for. The rest of the crew sat in silence, each of them processing the grief in their own way. Kieran stared at the floor, his hands clenched into fists, the enormity of what they had lost pressing down on him. Others wept quietly, their faces streaked with tears that went unnoticed in the dim light of the shuttle. But in that silence, something else took root, a bond, a connection forged through shared loss. The sacrifice Ash had made would never be forgotten, and though the team was fractured, something had changed in them all. They had been tested, and though they had lost much, they had also found something, a shared sense of purpose, a reason to carry on. Ash's death was not the end. It was a beginning. The air on the planet had become thick, laden with particles that once were unseen. A subtle tremor, not from the ground, but in the very atmosphere itself, ran through the environment. It wasn't chaotic, but the sense of impending change weighed on each of them. The process they had initiated was reaching its conclusion, but not one of them could confidently predict the nature of the result. Dawn approached, though the concept of day had become irrelevant. Time itself felt distorted in the presence of such monumental forces. It was not a simple celestial rotation that dictated the light and shadow anymore, but something far greater in energy that seemed to transcend the planet. That awareness pressed on everyone, causing the quiet moments to drag and stretch, as if the world held its breath for what was to come. The characters stood scattered across the final terraforming station. Each faced a horizon that had once been barren, but now pulsated with life, albeit an unfamiliar form of it. The skies had shifted in color, fading into gradients of hues they had no names for, and the soil beneath their feet seemed to hum, though it emitted no discernible sound. The tools they had brought, the machinery, the technology, the algorithms designed to control every outcome now seemed irrelevant, outstripped by the forces that had been unleashed. It wasn't just the planet undergoing a transformation. Each of them felt it within themselves. The deeper they went into the process, the more they realized that this mission was not merely about reshaping the physical landscape. The consequences would not be constrained by the planet's boundaries, and they all sensed that something far more ancient and inexplicable had been stirred. Mara stood alone at the edge of a cliff that overlooked one of the new valleys carved out by their initial efforts. Her fingers brushed against the rock, which had once been sharp, jagged, lifeless. Now, even the texture had softened, almost as if the stone itself was alive and breathing. She had dedicated her life to the science of terraforming, believing in the precision of numbers and equations, in predictable outcomes. But as she looked out over the transformed terrain, she could no longer trust in those certainties. What was occurring was beyond the scope of any calculation she had made. The fear within her wasn't just about what the planet had become. It was what it revealed about her own limitations. She had come here confident, detached, thinking herself above the emotional pull of the mission. Now, she felt more exposed than ever, her own insignificance glaring at her in the form of a landscape that no longer obeyed the principles she had dedicated her life to mastering. In the control room, Reyna stood staring at the data feeds, which had long since become unreadable. The algorithms were producing outputs that seemed nonsensical, energy surges that spiked and then disappeared without explanation, patterns in the seismic activity that suggested a kind of consciousness within the very crust of the planet. Reyna was analytical by nature, but this defied even her most abstract theories. Her thoughts drifted to the discussions she had avoided about the limits of control, about the idea that perhaps there were forces even science could not predict or master. It wasn't that the technology had failed them. It had performed exactly as expected. It was their assumptions that were unraveling. They had come believing they could transform this planet, impose their will on it, but now it seemed the planet itself had other plans. Her hand hovered over the controls. Every option before her felt wrong. Jonas stood by the entrance to the underground caverns, his chest tightening with each breath. The caves beneath them had been explored extensively, and the team had cleared them for any hazards. But now, standing here, he felt as though something was waiting in the depths below. It wasn't anything tangible, just a presence, something almost sentient. The journey to this point had been about creation, about building something new. But Jonas felt an unmistakable dread, the sense that they had awakened something older, something that should have been left untouched. Every step he took now felt like a step deeper into some unseen trap. It wasn't that the planet was fighting back, it was simply existing in a way they hadn't accounted for, a way they couldn't dominate. He clenched his fists, knowing that his courage would be tested, not in the physical sense, but in facing the unknown, in admitting that there were limits to what they could shape and control. Jonas had been the most vocal about pushing forward, about defying the risks, but now he felt the weight of that conviction crushing him. As the final hours of the transformation neared, Dr. Alara gathered the remaining team in the central hub. The air between them was heavy, and no one spoke at first. The raw emotion of the past days, combined with the mounting uncertainty, had worn everyone thin. They had come expecting to leave their mark on this planet, to be remembered as the ones who achieved the impossible. Now, all they could do was wait. As the final phase of terraforming activated, the planet was in motion, but so were they, shifting internally, transforming in ways they hadn't foreseen. Alara spoke, her voice measured and deliberate. "We've come to the final stage, but I think we all understand now. The results may not be what we intended. We were arrogant to believe we could anticipate every outcome." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, the team felt the magnitude of their actions, not just as scientists or explorers, but as individuals who had tried to reshape nature itself. "Whether we've created something magnificent or disastrous, we'll soon find out," she continued, her voice growing quieter, as though she were speaking to herself more than to them. "We've unlocked something ancient here, something that has been dormant for longer than we can fathom. And now, we have to live with that." They all felt it, then the shift in the planet's atmosphere, not sudden but gradual, like the slow turn of a great, unseen machine. It was as if the entire planet had inhaled deeply, preparing for something inevitable. In that moment, none of them spoke, but each of them knew that the real transformation was about to begin. And it was not just the planet that would change. This was the point of no return. The sky hung heavy with silence. The transformation of the planet was complete, but the finality of it all had yet to settle on the minds of those responsible. Humanity's long reach had extended beyond the stars, far beyond the boundaries of any other species. Yet now, in the aftermath of their achievement, a weighty presence hovered over them, invisible but palpable. The galaxy was watching. Alex stood at the helm of the ship, the black void of space stretching endlessly before him. He had watched from a distance as the planet below underwent its rebirth, a process that had left the surface pulsing with energies no one could fully explain. Now, the consequence of that action, and the judgment that would follow, began to materialize in the form of incoming transmissions from every corner of the galaxy. The ship's comm screen blinked incessantly, streams of data from various factions piling up in unread heaps. Some were filled with words of awe, others with declarations of outrage. Alec couldn't bring himself to engage with either. The scale of what had happened here was not just about terraforming. It was about humanity's place in the universe. And with that place came scrutiny, harsh, unavoidable, and total. One transmission caught his eye. It bore the insignia of the Draken Council, one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. He hesitated for a moment before opening it, and when he did, their message was short but potent. "By whose authority have you done this?" Alex swallowed hard. He wasn't prepared to answer that. The question wasn't about governance or protocol. It was about the moral authority of a species that had pushed past the limits of what had been deemed acceptable. What right did humanity have to wield power on this scale? Who had given them the permission to reshape worlds, to potentially alter the course of life throughout the galaxy? He left the message unanswered and turned away from the screen, his mind heavy with the enormity of the question. Down in the living quarters, Isha sat alone, watching the distant stars from her narrow window. The transformation they had wrought on the planet below wasn't just a physical one. It had reshaped the very fabric of their understanding. Isha had never been one to question her place in the universe. She had grown up believing in humanity's progress, its forward march through history. But now, as she gazed at the silent expanse outside the ship, she began to wonder if they had gone too far. What does it mean to create? The question gnawed at her. For so long, humanity had seen itself as the architect of its own destiny, a species that could bend reality to its will. But in their creation, had they not also brought destruction? Had they not erased something irreplaceable, something ancient, by their sheer act of creation? She thought of the others on the ship: Mara, Reyna, Jonas, Alec. Each of them had their reasons for being here, but they had never truly confronted the moral implications of their actions. Now, it seemed, the universe itself was forcing them to. Their silence, their thoughts left unspoken, felt as though they had already passed a kind of judgment on themselves. In the central command deck, Reyna watched the diplomatic channels light up. Messages flooded in from every known corner of the galaxy. Species from the Ilari Collective, the Zinthar Empire, and countless others sent their representatives. Some of the messages demanded explanations, others sought alliances, and still more expressed fear of what humanity had become. They had touched something primal with their terraforming, something that resonated deeply across the fabric of the universe. Reyna could feel the philosophical weight of it bearing down on her. For centuries, humanity had been striving for unity, but unity at what cost? She found herself meditating on the teachings of ancient philosophers who had grappled with the nature of power. Power, they said, was a force that could create, but it was also a force that could consume. What they had done was undeniably an act of creation, but in doing so, had they also unleashed forces beyond their control? She turned to the crew, her voice measured but with an undertone of deep reflection. What if this wasn't just about the planet? What if we're being judged not for the outcome, but for the act itself, who we are, what we've become? Her words lingered in the air, a stark contrast to the blinking screens, the digital voices demanding attention. They had set out to shape a world, but now they were being shaped by the questions they had unleashed. Jonas paced back and forth in the corridor. His mind was consumed with the knowledge that the galaxy was now focused on them. The moral weight of their actions began to press down, causing him to question everything. For so long, he had seen himself as an adventurer, a pioneer in uncharted territory. But now, that pioneering spirit felt hollow. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had violated something sacred, something that couldn't be undone. He stopped and leaned against the cold metal wall, closing his eyes. The image of the transformed planet burned into his mind. There was a beauty to it, yes, but it was a strange, unfamiliar beauty, one that held an underlying menace. They had altered the natural order, perhaps irreparably. In doing so, had they also altered themselves? He thought back to the conversations they had had before starting this mission. Back then, everything had seemed so clear, so purposeful. But now, clarity had given way to doubt. What had they really achieved? He opened his eyes and exhaled slowly. There were no easy answers. The next day, the crew gathered in the main chamber. No one spoke at first, each of them wrestling with their own thoughts. The external messages from the galaxy had stopped for now, but the silence felt worse. It was as though the galaxy itself had turned inward, reflecting on their actions, waiting for anything to happen. Finally, Alara spoke, breaking the tension. We need to decide. The galaxy is watching, and our next move will determine everything. It's not just about us anymore. It's about what humanity stands for. Do we continue, knowing that we could be seen as either creators or destroyers? Her words carried a weight none of them could escape. They had set out on this mission to transform a planet, but now they faced a far greater challenge: transforming themselves in the eyes of the galaxy. Would they be judged as conquerors, reshaping worlds in their own image, or as a force for life, unlocking the potential of the universe? Each of them looked at one another, searching for answers in the eyes of their companions. But none came. The galaxy's judgment was not yet clear, but the question itself loomed over them with more power than anything they had created. What does it mean to hold power in your hands? Was it to destroy or to elevate, to claim or to serve? As they prepared to address the Galactic Assembly, the weight of their choices sat heavy in their minds. No one knew what the next moment would bring, but the stakes had never been higher. The galaxy would soon pass its judgment on humanity, and for the first time they realized that the judgment was not just about the past, but about the future they were about to shape. The stars, distant and unblinking, seemed closer than ever. As the ship drifted silently through the cold expanse of space, the crew remained in a heavy, contemplative silence, wrestling with the gravity of their next step. Alex stood near the viewport, his arms crossed as he stared out at the newly transformed planet. The planet's surface now shimmered with vibrant hues, oceans of rich blue and fields of strange, iridescent flora that rippled with a soft, pulsating glow. It was unlike anything they could have imagined, but there was a darkness beneath that beauty. The galaxy had yet to reveal its full reaction, but Alec could feel it coming like a storm building on the horizon. He turned away from the window, his mind heavy with the Draken Council's question. "By whose authority have you done this?" The question still echoed in his mind, louder now, with a weight that hadn't existed before. He had no answer then, and even now, the answer eluded him. It wasn't just a matter of governance or legalities, it was a question of ethics, of the moral right they had to wield such power. They had crossed a line, but had they truly understood where that line was? In the common area, Reyna, Isha, Jonas, and Alara gathered around a circular table. The dim lighting of the ship cast long shadows on their faces, deepening the sense of unease that hung in the air. Reyna's eyes, usually so sharp and determined, now seemed distant, as if searching for a clarity she knew would not come. "We've unleashed something far greater than ourselves," Reyna said softly, her voice carrying a tone of reluctant resignation. "The galaxy knows it, they feel it, just as we do." Isha sat across from her, fingers lightly tracing the rim of a glass of water that she hadn't touched. "Do they fear us, or do they fear what we've created?" Jonas, his brow furrowed in deep thought, leaned back in his chair. "It's both. We've changed the natural order of things. They fear the unknown, and we've made ourselves the architects of that unknown." Alara, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the conversation, finally spoke, her voice steady but laced with a quiet intensity. "We've made a choice to transform this world, and now the galaxy will decide if we are fit to make those choices. But the question we should be asking is, are we?" Reyna's gaze flicked up to meet Alara's. "You're saying we judge ourselves before they do?" Alara nodded. "We have to. If we don't, we lose any control over the narrative. We lose our place in this galaxy." Jonas shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the table. "But what if we aren't ready? What if we aren't capable of making these decisions? Have we become something dangerous, even to ourselves?" The silence that followed was thick with tension, the unspoken fears that had been bubbling beneath the surface finally coming to light. They had taken on the role of creators, but at what cost? And had they truly understood the consequences of their actions? Alec entered the room, his presence immediately drawing their attention. He looked weary, as if the weight of the galaxy's scrutiny had physically pressed down on him. His eyes scanned the faces of his crewmates, seeing the same doubts and questions reflected in their expressions. "The Draken Council is demanding an answer," Alec said, his voice steady but low. "They want to know by whose authority we've done this." Alara's jaw clenched. "And what will we tell them? That we acted because we could? Because we had the technology?" "That's not enough," Reyna said, shaking her head. "It's never been enough. They'll see it as arrogance, as a dangerous power unchecked." "And they wouldn't be wrong," Isha added quietly. Her words hung in the air like a shadow, darkening the mood even further. Alec walked over to the table and placed his hands on its cool surface, leaning in slightly. "We didn't come here to destroy. We came here to create, to unlock the potential of this planet." "But in doing so," Jonas interjected, "we might have set something in motion that we can't control. We've altered the course of this planet's evolution, its ecosystem, its energy. We've made ourselves gods over it, but gods don't answer to anyone." Alec straightened, his expression hardening. We're not gods. We're explorers, scientists. We've pushed boundaries, yes, but we didn't do it out of hubris. We did it because we believe in progress. Alara's voice cut through the rising tension. Belief doesn't change the fact that we've forced the galaxy to confront something new, something they didn't choose. And now, they're questioning whether we're capable of handling the responsibility that comes with it. Reyna leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. So what do we do? Do we defend our actions and risk further alienating ourselves from the galactic community? Or do we admit we may have overstepped and hope for leniency? Alec met her gaze, the weight of leadership pressing down on him. Neither. We don't defend or admit anything. We show them who we are, what humanity stands for. We make them understand that this isn't just about power or control. It's about our place in the universe. And what is that place, Alec? Isha asked, her tone challenging but not hostile. What do we represent to them? Alec's eyes softened, and for a moment, he looked lost in thought. We represent possibility. We represent the idea that the universe isn't fixed, that it can be reshaped, reimagined. But we also represent the unknown, and that's what they fear. They fear us because we've shown them that nothing is set in stone, Reyna said, her voice quieter now, almost reflective. That change is possible, and that the rules they've followed for millennia don't apply anymore. But that doesn't mean they'll accept it, Alara pointed out. We've disrupted their sense of order, and when people are faced with disruption, they either adapt or they fight. The crew fell silent once more, the weight of their situation pressing down on them from all sides. They had changed the fate of an entire planet, but in doing so, they had also changed the fate of humanity. Whether that change would lead to redemption or ruin was a question none of them could yet answer. Several hours later, the ship's internal comm system buzzed to life. Incoming transmission from the Galactic Assembly, the Eye's voice announced, its neutral tone belying the importance of the message. Alec and the others hurried to the main deck, where the communication terminal was already lit up, waiting. Alec took a deep breath, then pressed the button to accept the transmission. The screen flickered for a moment before stabilizing, revealing the stern face of Ambassador Karath of the Draken Council. His features were sharp, his eyes unblinking as they stared directly at Alec. Captain Alec, Karath began, his voice deep and authoritative. The Galactic Assembly has convened to discuss the matter of your recent actions. There are those who see your transformation of the planet as a dangerous precedent, one that could lead to untold consequences for the galaxy at large. Others, however, view it as an unprecedented achievement, one that could unlock new potential for countless worlds. Alec held Karath's gaze, his own expression neutral but attentive. The question before us is simple, Karath continued. Do we allow humanity to continue on this path, or do we intervene? It is a question of trust, whether we can trust your species with the power you now wield. You have been summoned to present your case before the Assembly. The tension in the room was palpable. The crew exchanged glances, each of them aware that this was the moment they had been preparing for. Everything they had done, everything they had created, was now under scrutiny. I understand, Alec said, his voice steady. We'll be there. The journey to the Galactic Assembly's meeting point was tense and silent. The crew sat in their respective stations, each lost in their own thoughts. Alec remained at the helm, his mind racing with the arguments he would need to present. How do you convince an entire galaxy that what you've done is not only justifiable but necessary? How do you ask for trust when the very foundation of that trust has been shaken? Reyna, sitting next to him, finally broke the silence. What are you going to say? Alec didn't look away from the viewport. I don't know yet. I think we have to remind them of why we're here in the first place. What drove us to do this? It's not just about power, it's about survival. It's about making a future for humanity. But will they see it that way? Reyna asked, her voice laced with doubt. Alec exhaled slowly. I don't know, but we have to try. The Assembly's meeting chamber was vast, filled with representatives from every corner of the galaxy. The air was thick with tension as Alec and the crew entered the chamber, all eyes turning toward them. The weight of the moment settled heavily on their shoulders. Ambassador Karath stood at the center of the room, flanked by members of the Draken Council and other prominent factions. His gaze remained fixed on Alec as he gestured for them to approach. "Captain Alec," Karath said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "You stand here today to answer for your actions. You have transformed an entire planet, reshaping its very nature. The galaxy demands to know, by whose authority have you done this, and why should we allow humanity to continue on this path?" Alec stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. This was at the moment that would determine not only their fate, but the fate of their entire species. "I understand the fear that our actions have caused," Alec began, his voice calm but firm. "We've pushed the boundaries of what's possible, and in doing so, we've disrupted the order that many have known for centuries. But we didn't do this out of a desire for power or control. We did this because we believe in the potential of life, of creation. We believe that the universe is not a fixed entity, but one that can be reshaped for the better." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "We acted because we had the ability to bring life to a world that was once dead. We acted because we believe that humanity has a place in the future of this galaxy, not as conquerors, but as creators, as a species that seeks to build, not destroy." The room remained silent as Alec's words echoed through the chamber. The winds across the planet's surface had changed, carrying a fresh scent that hadn't been there before, like the fragrance of a new world just beginning to breathe. The transformation had been completed, though not without cost. Vast stretches of the once desolate land were now teeming with life. Plants that hadn't existed in this part of the galaxy blossomed under a sky that had shifted from a dull, grayish hue to a radiant blue. Rivers ran through valleys that had once been barren, and the sun now shone down on landscapes so pristine they almost seemed untouched by the harshness of time. But those who remained to witness this moment weren't untouched. Alec stood on a high ridge overlooking the expanse, his gaze sweeping over the new world they had forged. Around him, the other survivors, fewer than they had started with, moved with a quiet sense of purpose. Some were collecting data, others were examining the newly formed ecosystems, but no one spoke. The silence wasn't born from fear or uncertainty, it was a silence of contemplation, each person trying to process what had been gained and, more importantly, what had been lost. Alec's mind drifted to those who had fallen along the way, the scientists who had pushed the boundaries too far, the soldiers who had fought to protect this vision when others sought to destroy it, the lives consumed in the struggle to bring this dead planet back to life. He felt the weight of it all, a deep, gnawing guilt that no words could wash away. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Kira approaching, her face as solemn as his own. The fiery determination that had defined her in the early days was still there, but now it was tempered by the gravity of what they had accomplished. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, standing beside him and gazing out at the horizon. And yet, she didn't need to finish her sentence. Alec knew what she meant. The beauty of the world they had created stood in stark contrast to the cost. Lives had been lost, and not just human lives. The terraforming had sparked conflicts across the galaxy, an entire species had perished as a result of the upheaval. The planet was alive, but in the silence that followed the storms of creation, they were left with the reality of their actions. "Do you think it was worth it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alec hesitated. He had asked himself that question countless times, and he still didn't have an answer that sat comfortably in his heart. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think we needed to try." Kira nodded, her expression pensive. "We've become something else, haven't we? Humanity, we've crossed a line." "We have," Alec agreed, "but it's not just about the line we've crossed. It's about what lies ahead. We didn't do this because we could. We did it because we believed it was necessary. But now we have to live with the consequences, good and bad." She was silent for a moment, her eyes scanning the landscape. "We created life here, But we also destroyed so much along the way. Can the two ever really balance out? Alec didn't answer immediately. His thoughts drifted back to the philosophical debates that had raged in the lead up to their mission. Creation and destruction, life and death, these were the forces that had always shaped the universe. And now, humanity had taken control of those forces in a way they never had before. Maybe they're not meant to balance out, he said finally. Maybe that's just the nature of life. Every act of creation is also an act of destruction in some way. Every choice we make opens one path and closes another. Kira looked at him, her eyes softening. But does that mean we should stop trying? Stop creating? Alec shook his head. No. If anything, it means we need to be more mindful of the choices we make. We've seen what happens when we rush in without thinking about the consequences. The galaxy has seen what we're capable of for better or for worse. But now, we have the chance to do things differently. We can learn from this. Below them, the rest of the team was gathering, preparing for the next stage of their work. They had created a world, but now they had to tend to it, nurture it, make sure it didn't spiral into chaos. Alec turned his gaze back to the horizon. We need to make sure that what we've built here becomes a beginning, not an end. As the days passed, the galaxy responded to what humanity had done. Messages poured in from across the stars. Some were offers of cooperation, while others were less kind. The factions that had opposed the terraforming were not easily placated, and there were threats of retaliation. Yet, there was also a sense of awe, a recognition that humanity had achieved something extraordinary. For all the chaos and destruction, they had turned a dead world into a living one. The power of creation was undeniable. The Galactic Council, however, remained divided. They had convened to discuss humanity's future, and the debate had been fierce. Some argued that humanity had overstepped, that they were too dangerous to be allowed such freedom. Others, more pragmatic, saw the potential for cooperation and growth. The galaxy was vast, and if humanity could harness their abilities responsibly, they could become a force for good. But trust was a fragile thing. In the heart of the newly transformed world, Alec, Kira, and the others held a final meeting. The weight of their decisions hung in the air, and everyone understood that they were standing at a crossroads. The planet was alive, but the galaxy was watching. What they did next would define humanity's place among the stars. We need to be careful, Alec said, addressing the group. The galaxy is looking at us differently now. Some see us as a threat, others as an opportunity. We can't afford to make any more mistakes. Agreed, Kira said. But we also can't let fear stop us from moving forward. We didn't come this far just to retreat. Rin, the team's chief scientist, spoke up. We've proven that we can create life where there was none. But now we need to show that we can be responsible stewards of that life. The galaxy needs to see that we're not just builders, we're caretakers. There were murmurs of agreement. The scope of their responsibility weighed heavily on them all. Alec nodded, sensing the unity in the room. We've reshaped this planet, but we need to reshape ourselves too. If we're going to be part of this galaxy, truly part of it, we need to be better than we've been. More thoughtful, more careful. The power we have, it's not just ours. It belongs to the universe. He paused, looking at each of his teammates in turn. What we do here won't just define this planet or our species. It'll shape the future for every living being in this galaxy. We've been given the chance to create something new. Let's make sure we create something worth remembering. In the days that followed, the survivors worked tirelessly. The new ecosystem was delicate, and it required constant attention. But with each passing day, life on the planet grew stronger. The once desolate landscape now buzzed with energy, and the scars of their struggle began to heal both in the environment and in themselves. Alec spent his nights under the stars, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. He thought of the choices they had made, the sacrifices, and the lessons learned. There was no going back to the way things had been, but perhaps that was for the best. One night, Kira joined him by the fire. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars twinkle above the newly born world. Do you think we'll ever truly understand the full impact of what we've done? She asked, her voice soft. Alex shook his head. No, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe it's enough that we keep trying, that we keep learning. Kira smiled faintly. I suppose that's all we can do. They sat together in the quiet, watching the stars as they reflected on the new beginning they had forged. Humanity's place in the galaxy had been altered, irrevocably changed by the events that had transpired. But in the end, it wasn't about power or control, it was about the choices they had made, and the responsibility that came with those choices. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Alec rose to his feet, looking out at the world they had brought to life. There was still so much to do, so many challenges to face. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. They had created something new, something alive, and that was a beginning worth fighting for. In the end, perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all, that creation and destruction were not opposites, but part of the same cycle. And within that cycle, humanity had found its place not as conquerors, but as creators. As the sun rose on a new day, Alec turned to Kira, a quiet determination in his eyes. This is just the beginning. Kira nodded, her expression resolute. A new beginning.